Hey you guys, welcome back to my channel. It's Shania. So another month has already passed. I feel like it was just yesterday that I was filming and posting my January wrap up, but here we are at the end of February. The month went by so quickly, and now I'm gonna sit down and talk to you guys about all of the books that I read this month. So I have quite a few for you guys, so let's not make this video any longer than it needs to be and jump into it now. So before I dive in and tell you guys a little bit about the books that I read this month, I want to give you guys kind of a breakdown for the books that I read this month compared to last month. So for the month of February, I read a total of 10 books, which honestly I'm very happy with. It's not as much as last month where I read 16 books. However, I'm just glad that I read anything at all. So since I read 6 books less than I did in the month of January, of course then my page count is going to be lower. So this month I read 2,925 pages versus last month, which was 5,128. I also thought that in January I was giving a lot of low ratings for books, but apparently it was nothing compared to this month, where this month I was giving a average rating of 2.7 versus what I was giving in January, which was 3.25. Another surprising thing is that I read more romance this month than I did in January, where I read 6 romance books compared to 5 in January, and then I did read 2 dystopian books. However, I wouldn't even classify the books that I'm saying are dystopian. I just put them in that category. However, they're more like a post-apocalyptic book, but we'll get into that in a little bit. And then I didn't read any contemporaries versus last month where I read 3. And then this month I also read 1 paranormal and no horror books compared to January. So those are all the statistics that I had for the month of February. And with that, let's get into the very first book that I kicked off the month with, which was Nevernight by J. Kristoff. So Nevernight is the first book in the Nevernight series by J. Kristoff, and this is a fantasy adult book that centers around our main character Mia, who is competing to become one of the top assassins. Even though our main character is only 16 years old, this book is categorized as an adult book because there is a lot of violence in this. I mean, what else would you expect from a book about assassins? And there's a lot of sexy scenes in here. I mean, J. Kristoff, he writes smut pretty good, and that's pretty much why I feel like it was marketed as an adult book. If you guys are fans of Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas and you're missing a badass female protagonist, then I would definitely check out this one because they are similar in a lot of ways, but also different. Overall, I really enjoyed this first book. Mia is such a great character, and I loved her thought process, and I love just the world that J. Kristoff built with this. And the ending of the book left me completely flabbergasted. I had no idea what the heck was going on, and I had to get the second book right away just so I knew what happened with Mia after those events occurred. So far, I really like this series, and I cannot wait to finish this second book. Alright, so the next 2 books are part of a series that I started back in December, and that series is Praying for Rain by B.B. Easton, but specifically the 2 books that I read this month are Fighting for Rain and Dying for Rain by B.B. Easton. So this is the series that I mentioned earlier that deals with a post-apocalyptic world where actually in the first book, Praying for Rain, those are the events that take place before the apocalypse hits, and then the last 2 are when the apocalypse is actually upon them and the characters are dealing with it. So this series focuses on our 2 main characters. We have Wes and we have Rain, and they are just basically trying to fight for survival before the apocalypse hits, and of course their paths cross and they have a little romance that just blossoms out of the events that occur. As for the second book, this one was definitely my least favorite. I gave this one 2 stars. I just did not like the events that happened. Everything that happened in it was like prolonged beyond reason. I was like, why are we still here? Why are we still focusing on this? It didn't make any sense, and the characters, their development that happened in the first book just seemed to be like lost in the second book, and they just backtracked way before, and I felt like I understood what the author was trying to get across in the second book, but I feel like she handled it just totally wrong, and I didn't feel like it was actually feasible in any way. But at the same time, I still enjoyed one of the characters, and I liked the way that that character tried to balance what was happening in the second book, if that makes sense. Probably not. Then as to the third and final book of the series, I was kind of left not satisfied with this ending, but I still gave it 3 stars anyways. Overall, I thought the take on this type of apocalypse was really, really interesting, and I kind of wish that romance actually wasn't the center of attention in this series. I felt like maybe if the apocalypse was actually the main component and everybody working together, kind of like The 100 in a way, and that like romance was just kind of a side story, I felt like it would have been way better. But the romance kind of just overtook what was actually happening, and it just didn't seem real to me, honestly. Mainly, I did really enjoy this series, mostly though just because of the apocalypse and the idea and concept behind it, not so much because of the romance. Though the romance was cute, I feel like the romance was the best in the first book, and then it kind of just got lost and kind of dumb throughout the next two books. But I definitely think it's a series that you guys should check out, especially if you want like a different take on a romance book. Definitely check out this one then. Alright, so moving on to the next book. This is a book that I DNF'd. I DNF'd it hard, and I just did not like it at all. So this is a paranormal romance series that deals with vampires. Specifically, we've got, our main group of vampires, the Black Dagger Brotherhood, that has, I think, about 7 head honcho dudes that protect all the other vampires from being outed in the human world. And it's really odd, honestly. So we have our main dude, our love interest, and his name is Wrath, and he's the last living purebred vampire ever. So he's like head honcho. He's like the king of all the vampires. And then you've got the other 6, and their names are super weird. We got like Sadist, that's spelled with like a Z, and then we've got Vicious, Rage, and some other weird names, and they are all just, they're tightly knit, and the reason that they're protecting themselves and the other vampires is because there's these enemies that are basically humans that sell their souls to the devil, and in that way they can then kill vampires. Overall, the book was just not good. I think I read about 390 pages of this book, and there's only like 400 something, so I gave it my all. I really did, and it just I wasn't having it, and I really wanted to like it because I know that Chandler Ainsley here on YouTube recommended it. She loves it. She gave it a 5-star rating, and I really wanted to love it, but I did not. So we DNF'd it, and I will not be continuing that series unless you guys say something like the next books get better, then maybe I'll try it again, but at this point, it's a no-go for me. Alright, so the next set of books are ones that I've already mentioned in my last 2 videos, but we're gonna mention them again. And that series is To All the Boys I Loved Before by Jenny Han. So if you guys haven't heard of this series yet or seen the Netflix movies, this is about a young girl in high school that ends up writing letters to all of the guys that she once loved, but she says it's time to move on, and to do so, she writes them a letter, but she never sends them. But of course, those letters, they get sent out, and that causes a lot of complications for her because one of them goes to her sister's boyfriend, and that's just not good. That's a complication. And then, of course, we have other dudes that are coming out and being like, oh, I got your letter, you're in love with me, and she's like, nope. For the first book, To All the Boys I Loved Before, I ended up giving this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I thought this one was, definitely is a cute contemporary romance. We got a really adorable little family, which I loved the most, even more than the romance. I just loved the chemistry and the relationships that Lara Jean had with her family. I thought it was just super adorable. As for the second one, P.S. I Still Love You, this one, I just did not like this one. I ended up giving this one 3 stars, honestly. It could have been a 2-star read for me, but I gave it 3 stars just because, again, I really liked the family. But I felt like the characters were acting completely out of character. I thought that Peter in this was just annoying. Lara Jean was kind of acting dumb about the whole situation, and honestly, I stan John Ambrose, and that is where I was upset. But yeah, this one I just didn't like at all, and compared to the movie that just came out, the movie wasn't even that great either, but I still think it was better than this one. Alright, so moving to the next set of books that I read this month, it is another series, but this series was different, very different, and I was a little bit uncomfortable with this one. But that is the Venom series. Specifically, the first one is called Passion and Venom by S. Williams. So I found this series from just basically browsing Goodreads, and I was a little bit intrigued because if you guys saw my romance recommendations video, I talked about how I really like mafia boss type romances, and this one was definitely it. So I read the synopsis, really liked it, and I got it on Kindle Unlimited, and I really was excited for it. But this series was a complete letdown, and it was extremely extremely violent. I don't know if I've ever read anything that made me cringe and just like feel so uncomfortable in my life, but I read the entire series for some reason. So for each of these books that are in this series, we have Passion and Venom, we have Venom and Ecstasy, and then for the third one, we have Venom and Glory. Each of these 3 books, I ended up giving a 2-star rating just because it wasn't great at all. So this book opens up with our main character, I think her name is pronounced Gianna, but I'm not entirely sure, but it opens up with her getting married to her husband, but of course, on their way to their honeymoon, the car gets hijacked and her husband gets shot and killed right in front of her, and she gets kidnapped by these strange men who she's never met. While in captivity, she is treated absolutely horrible, like picture the worst you could ever be held when you're kidnapped, and that was the situation she was in. And she is introduced to a big-time mafia boss, Draco Molina, and he is a bad man. Just basically, like, I was getting like Pablo Escobar type of vibes from him. He was a bad guy, but like hot, basically. So as I mentioned, this book is very, very violent. It goes into extreme description when it comes to people that die in this book. The worst part about this series, in my mind, was that there is a rape scene in the very first book, and it is a very brutal rape scene. It goes into a lot of description, and it was just really, really difficult to read. And I think if I had not read the entire series in like a day, I would not have continued with the series, but I continued on just because I was interested to see how the author was handling these situations after those events occurred. And honestly, the author didn't handle it that great. She kind of just brushed it off and continued on like nothing really happened, and the characters really weren't as affected as they should have been. Like maybe she only spent like maybe 50 pages on like that rape scene that occurred and just continued on, and I was like, really? So I'm just telling you guys, just so you guys are aware that this is a very, very violent book. There's a lot of trigger warnings behind this, and if you guys aren't comfortable with any of these type of situations, then I would not read it. However, I still like mafia boss romances for some reason after this one, but it wasn't great. All of them were 2-star ratings, and I just am glad I'm done with that series, to be honest. Alright, so the very last book that I read this month was one that was actually recommended to me by a subscriber in my romance recommendations video, and that book is The Misadventures of a College Girl by Lauren Rowe. So this book is the 8th book, part of a series called the Misadventures series, and it just deals with a bunch of different situations. I think like we have this one, which is dealing with a college girl. I feel like there might be one about a high school girl, and a bunch of other type of situations, but each book is basically different, and I don't think that there's really any ties between them, but I'm not for sure because I dove in and I read the 8th book in the series. I really did like this book. It deals with, of course, a college girl. She goes to college and she is a virgin before she goes to college, and of course she ends up meeting this guy that she really likes at first, but she meets him because she just basically wants to get rid of her virginity and move on with her life and not have it hanging over her head forever. But of course she makes this bond with this guy, and they end up having this like course together where they agree to kind of help each other out a little bit, and they make this syllabus that basically goes through all the things she needs to do as a girl that doesn't have her virginity anymore, basically. But this book is very, very hot, very steamy, a lot of good romance in there, and there's a lot of like cutesy little vibes behind it. So if you want just like a really adorable romance with a lot of smut, then definitely check out this one. I did really like it, and I'm really glad that my subscribers are telling me recommendations. Alright, so those are all the books that I read in the month of February. I feel like overall it was a really good month of reading. I had some good ones, I had some bad ones, but that's pretty typical for me. And honestly, I had a lot of romance books, but again, pretty typical for me, although I wanted to focus on romance this month because it was the month of love. We had Valentine's Day, of course. If you guys had read any of the books that I talked about in this list, let me know what your thoughts were down below. I'd be really interested to see if we had any similar or contrasting opinions in regards to any of the books. Or if you guys had read any really good books that you think I need to check out, again, let me know down below. But other than that, thank you guys so much for watching, and if you guys haven't already, please subscribe. I would love it if you guys join the family. And if you guys like this video, be sure to hit that like button down below and the notification bell if you want to be notified whenever I upload. But thank you guys so much, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!